encourage, enlighten, empower. The Light Network.
Jim Murrell was born with a congenital heart defect known as transposition of the great vessels. Doctors warned Jim's parents that he probably wouldn't live to see adulthood, but needless to say, Jim exceeded their expectations. He is now a husband, father of two, and a gospel preacher, thanks to a heart he received from a gracious organ donor in his family. I asked Jim to tell us of the first recollections that he had of his condition.
Best I can remember, I was probably beginning kindergarten and grade school when I sort of realized what was going on. Of course, as a younger child, you just play outside like everybody else. I mean, I felt pretty good. I didn't have any real knowledge of it at that time. But by the time you start kindergarten, that's when the official restrictions go in. All of a sudden, your parents are going to school. They're telling your teachers about it. They're telling your PE coach that you're not supposed to run in PE. When they do different fitness tests, such as running a mile, you're not supposed to be involved in that. So that's kind of when it really hits home with you, that something's different. Of course, I ignored that most of the time. I went ahead and did what I would until that got to be my advantage. You know, if the PE coach says run a mile and you don't really want to, you can use it that way. And so that's kind of what I remember, at least. Probably, I would say 5, 6 years old, 8 or 9 years old. I had to go to the doctor every year at that point. Of course, I went out to every 3 years eventually, but every year at that point. So I knew it was a big deal because I had transposition of the great vessels, which was a pretty rare condition at that time. Really difficult to treat. As a matter of fact, when I had my surgery back in 1975, I was the youngest baby ever in Alabama to have open heart surgery. And so it was a big deal, experimental type procedure almost at that point. But what I'm getting to is when I would go to the doctor on those yearly visits, at that point at least, I knew something was different because it wasn't just me and my parents and the doctor. Basically, at times even, they would move the table from the typical exam room over to a conference room because there would sometimes be 25 or 30 doctors around watching. And so you knew that something was special. And I think at times that scared me. And then later, I kind of got a kick out of it. I liked the extra attention. I like to be that guy coming in the hall, and I'm kind of still that way. So I love it when people ask about the details of it, even in the hospitals, you know, what's going on. So the condition is just as the word's transposed is. Basically, the heart is not turned physically, but it's hooked up differently. And so your larger pump that's supposed to be supplying your body with the blood, which ought to be oxygenated by then, it's not doing that. That pump is going to your lungs, which is typically the smaller one. So those are reversed. So basically, your heart doesn't have the capacity, blood-wise, on that smaller side to try to run your whole body. And so symptomatically, typically, your symptoms are going to basically end up being fatigue, a little bit of windedness and such as that, but not nearly as bad as your typical congestive heart failure. When someone goes into typical congestive heart failure, the first thing you might notice is they got a lot of fluid, they're on oxygen, and such as that. Not really that way with the transposition case. You're almost the back opposite. The symptoms are severe, and as the doctors expressed over time, of course I learned more about it in the last few years than ever, but the symptoms with the transposition case can actually make a much quicker turn for the worse than others because you do look so good, you do feel so good, and then you kind of crash toward the end. Now, when I went in for surgery at that point, because it was so rare, I was so small, I was only 6 months old at the time. They needed me to be at least a year. And so they only gave about a 10% chance of coming out of surgery. Of course, I survived that. And then after that, they did not assume I could live out of childhood. They never assumed I'd be a teenager, and they certainly never assumed I would make it to adulthood. So there wasn't a real life expectancy. All they were hoping for at that time was that, hey, if we can get him through this, maybe we can develop a different procedure. Maybe we can get a better surgery, set up and developed really that we can use. And of course, that never really came. I did so well I didn't need it, which was a great blessing, but that never really came. They have made improvements on how they treat that. There is a different surgery now called the arterial switch that does work better, but it was just something because of the scar tissues and the repairs that had to be made so early, it wasn't even an option for me even when it was developed. So,
while in high school, Jim met his wife Jennifer at an area youth event. She describes her meeting with Jim as love at first sight. Initially, and Jennifer knew nothing of Jim's condition. For her, his condition wasn't even an issue.
I met him when he was 19. We met at Munford Church of Christ at a youth devotional. And it was pretty much, I guess, love at first sight. because we just kind of connected and started talking, and by the end of that week, we were talking almost every day, and I knew nothing of any of that, any of his heart condition for a while. I always kid and joke around saying, well, he waited till after I fell in love with him to tell me that he had this, heart condition, that he wasn't even supposed to be alive when I met him.
Mm.
And I don't know, he was just so healthy, and he worked, on an easy week it was 40 hours, but most of the time he was working 60, 70 hours a week. And then he was running around doing whatever. So to me, it was just like, there's not a problem. So I never thought about it, really.
On September 30th, 2006, everything changed.
September 30th, 2006, that day is when everything changed. Because up till then, it was normal. And then we were supposed to have the elders over to eat, and his heart just started stopping. It just stopped. And so that we had to go to the emergency room, and that's kind of where it all began. It was scary, because in my mind I went back to think, okay, he does have heart problems, but all this time it had been normal. Cameron was about 6 months old, and Juliana was 4 at that time when his heart started messing up. Yeah.
The emergency room over there was different because they were scared to death.
Mm-hmm.
This is a little bitty, we call it the Band-Aid station of a hospital. They just didn't have the funding. They didn't have the equipment, the doctors. And so I went there with these symptoms, and basically the doctor put me in a room. There happened to be a glass window there, and she sat outside the glass window on the phone, panicked, calling Birmingham. She didn't know what to do. For example, they asked for a 12-lead EKG, which would be standard in your cardiologist office. They didn't have that. All they had was a 4-lead in that hospital. And so they did the 4-lead best they could, and she stayed on the phone the entire time with Birmingham. And basically they were trying to decide if they wanted me to come over. She was pretty much begging them, let us send him to you, because we don't want to touch this. And that's eventually what I did that night. Early the next morning, we drove to Birmingham so I could see my regular doctors and all the specialists. And it moved from the rhythm troubles, which got worse. I started going to ventricular tachycardia, or VTAC, which my doctors call the rhythm of death. Mm-hmm. And that's just basically, if that's sustained for long and all, you're dead. There's just no way around it. They can't do anything for that in the moment but shock you, and that's not going to happen if you're laying on the street somewhere. And so I started to have that. They started looking into putting in a defibrillator / they call it an ICD, but a defibrillator / pacemaker in, which I had discovered my heart rate at night was going so low I couldn't recover. In the 30s and 40 range. You just don't recover from that. The next morning you wake up, you feel just as bad as you did when you go to bed. And so that started. Things didn't really take so much a bad turn for the worse, although they're already talking transplant, until my heart started to stiffen. They talk about a hard-hearted person. I literally had one. The heart would, as far as contracting, it did fairly well, but when it went to expel itself or to open back up for blood to refill, it couldn't do that very well. And so from then, it's just the process of progressively getting worse. Of course, this is over about a 5.5, 6 year period. Eventually, I end up on an IV med 24 hours a day. I've got a PICC line in my arm, IV meds going in all the time. The medication made my heart pump. The pacemaker told it to pump. And that's about it. I was surviving almost like a life support situation. I could not have survived without it once I went on that medication. So.
On portable life support, Jim lived with the family and tried to survive as best he could. Without a transplant, Jim's condition wouldn't improve. In fact, it grew worse and worse. Life not only changed for Jim, his family felt the enormous weight of Jim's condition as well.
We knew that the transplant would come, but as far as having a husband, I basically went from, I felt like a single mom, because he would sleep. Literally for days, he would sleep 12, 14 hours a day. I mean, he would wake up for a few minutes, maybe eat, and then he'd go back to sleep. The kids, Cameron doesn't remember a time playing with his dad ever until now that he's got the transplant. Juliana, it was hard on her because she remembers how good he felt and everything, but it was extremely hard on me because it felt like I had almost another child that was completely disabled and having to take care of the everything. So it was really hard, but he would rest, and it was like it was something that we would tell. He would literally rest and rest and rest, and then he would get up so he could preach. But then after he would preach, he'd have to sleep all afternoon so he could get up and do it again. And it was just, to me, that was hard. But I told him as long as he was there and I could look at him or he would talk to me every once in a while, everything was going to be fine.
As long as he was there, everything was going to be fine. Unfortunately, Jim's condition worsened drastically over the 10 months he was receiving 24-hour medication. Ultimately, Jim would end up in the hospital. No longer with his family, things became even more difficult.
I started on the PICC line around September or August of 2012. And, of course, there was 10 months total on that PICC line. 24/7, this medication, you don't let it stop. You actually change bags while it's still running. I mean, you just don't stop. Your heart becomes addicted to that med. But at the point, which fast forward, I was blessed. I preached more then than ever, really, continuing on. And, it motivated me. I'm going to stand up here with a PICC line because I can. I'm thankful that I had that. But you count it all down. We make it through. We make it all the way. I'm in the hospital in November of 12, December, Christmas night, I'm in the hospital for a week, and there from there a week or 8 days after. I'm in November, December, January, March, no, maybe not March, but April, and then May the 2nd is the date we're looking for. I had actually preached on May the 1st of the Weaver Church of Christ, preached that night, Wednesday night, and went to the hospital, went for a regular checkup on May the 2nd, and was planning to literally leave the hospital there after my checkup, pick up the children from school, and go to South Georgia, where I was going to speak on a lectureship on Saturday and a Friends and Family Day all day on Sunday. I had all these symptoms, but I wanted to push on. Of course, the doctor said then, you're not going. And so I argued really hard. I kept promising, I'll be back Monday. Let me preach. Let me do what I plan to do. They wouldn't do it. And so in order to stay on the transplant list, which is what they threatened me with, we're going to pull you off the transplant list if you're not going to cooperate. I called and canceled my speaking engagements. Cliff covered for me, that kind of stuff. And I stayed. And I knew there was going to be a day that you're going to have to get so sick that you're not coming home. So that was it. May the 2nd was it for me. And they started upping that medication. They were upping it, almost doubling it every day, trying to help. Also trying to get me to the top of the list. The doctor said no matter how good you think you feel, when we go in and do these casts, things are a lot worse than you think. And so they were back. They said I was backed into a corner. I had run it to the end. That's what I intended to do. I was going to run this to the absolute end. And I'd done that. So then they started threatening with other treatments, which I didn't like. One of them has not to go into any real explanation, but one of them has a 120-day lifespan on it. I mean, you start this medicine, your heart becomes addicted to it. If they pull it, you die. And at 120 days, you've been on it too long. And so you could nearly pull out a calendar and start checking days like you're in prison then. I didn't want that. I was just a few days from that when my heart came along, when this heart came available and I got it. I was just a few days and they were going to do that. But the medicines at that time, the dosages were so high, I was functioning much better. I felt great, but that was miserable, having that much medicine pumped in you all day, every day. And so that was tough by that point. Of course, I'm worried to death about my family. They're at home. They can't be there every day. Children still in school. And I'm condemned till whenever. And, you don't know what the thinking is. So you're going to get a heart in 2 weeks, 2 months, or if you make it 2 years. Well, the likelihood was I wasn't going to make it. So.
Well, me and his mother made a pact that one of us was going to be over there no matter what. And so I would go over there and spend a couple of days, and then she would go over there and spend a couple of days. But the first week or two, I went over there and drove back and forth every single day, while the kids were in school or whatever, because I just wanted to see him. It was hard. It was hard not having him here, but he started that daily dose, which I think you and him talked a lot about that, and that helped a lot because we could physically see Daddy in the hospital and know that he was okay. And it was like we always have Bible time together every single night. And so he was there teaching us from the Bible, and we could see him, and then we would have FaceTime, and that was our normal part of our life then, and that helped a lot, just seeing him and having him teach from the Bible, and the kids being able to talk to him and stuff. And of course we would take the kids out of school and let them go over there as much as we could.
While in Birmingham, Jim was in a race against time. He needed a heart badly. After a missed opportunity, Jim finally came up for a transplant on May the 22nd of 2013.
May the 15th, I had a missed transplant opportunity. Basically, there was one that seemed to be a match, so they come in early in the morning. It just happened that day. It was early in the morning. Tell me about it. Of course, I let the family know after a while. They all come over. I don't know how many people came that day. I mean, every preacher in half this state, and their families, and I know they were there, that kind of thing. So a lot of people there on May the 15th. Of course, that was a missed opportunity. We go through the whole day, maybe 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon. That's not yours. So I kind of had a buffer there. I knew what to expect. I'd been through it before. And so when it came up exactly a week later, on May the 22nd, actually, it was about 15 minutes till 8, so services were nearly over. Jennifer and them were just about done worshiping here at Ironton. And I didn't really want to bother anybody, but I had to go ahead. And so I texted her and Cliff and whomever, because I didn't know whose phone might go off, and to let them know that I was up again. And this time it kind of felt a little bit better for some reason. It did feel better. I felt more like it might happen, but there's no way of knowing that. And so, of course, people rush over there immediately after services. Jennifer, the children, Sherry Harris I think Sherry Harris actually had our children, but she brought them there. My mother and father came over, and everybody's just sitting there waiting. And most people fell asleep. Some of them did, at least. And but I didn't. Not that I was that nervous. I really expected I would be, and I'll tell more about that. But I basically just got out and walked the halls a little more. I'd already walked 2 miles that day. And, of course, I was able to do that most days, which was a blessing with the med's help.
Mm-hmm.
But I got out and probably walked another mile. As a matter of fact, I met up with one of my doctors in the hall. Of course, it's pitch black dark. They've cut the lights off even out in the hallway, except for some little night lights down low at the floor. And he said, "You don't have to walk anymore. You're getting a new heart." And I said, "No, I want to keep my legs under me." That's one thing they had taught me. So that's kind of my way of working through it. Well, the process was all night. It was 5 o'clock the next morning. We're getting updates regularly. And we know by probably 2 o'clock in the morning, we know it's definitely a match. So it's going to be mine. I'm the candidate. And but by 5 o'clock the next morning, I go to pre-op. Spend some time in pre-op, and that's when things really ramp up. The doctors come in. We get the information just kind of on accident that it's coming from Oklahoma. It's a 5-hour flight in a jet. So that's why things have taken so long. Of course, there's a family that's had to make a decision on the other end too. But nonetheless, we get that information. And they actually told me, this is kind of one of the most providential parts. They actually told me then, so we're going to carry you back into surgery early and get you open and start working. I didn't know what that meant. They said, well, we're afraid there'll be a lot of scar tissues, this and that from the previous surgery. And so we really need to get working. And so I kind of pinned him up on that. He was vague. And I asked him, I said, how far are we going with this? And he didn't really answer. And I said, you're taking it to the point of no return, aren't you? And he said, yes. And so I knew by that apparently they were going to get me in there, put me on bypass, and that was going to be it for this heart. As it turned out, though, I went back, and I ended up laying on the table there roughly, not necessarily open the whole time because they had to prep me to get me that way, but about an hour and a half passed while I was in the operating room, and they didn't have to do anything. They opened me up. There's nothing to do but wait. So the heart gets there. Of course, it was supposed to be a 12 to 14-hour surgery, which is what was expected with a transposition case, and even then it's an iffy thing. But I go back there, and the surgery is over with in just a little under 6 hours.
Wow.
And so the panic for the family, you think that'd be a joyful thing, but when they walk out of a 12 to 14-hour surgery and they tell your family the doctor wants to talk to you now and it's only been 6 hours, that put them into a panic because obviously something has gone wrong. But that wasn't it. I was fine. Backing up just a little bit, the feelings of that moment I always thought, and I've shared this with people before, I had this nightmare. I'd wake up with cold sweats for maybe a year before even sometimes. This imagination, just being honest, that they're going to take my heart out, throw it away, and try to put in a new one. And if it doesn't start, you're done. That's the way it is. That's the reality, really. And so I'd wake up in cold sweats from that. But on the actual rolling process from pre-op to the operating room, it's a long ride on the gurney. Mm-hmm. Every corner that you turn, I'm thinking, this is fixing to be. This is the moment where I'm going to want to jump off the bed and run, if I can. You're thinking, here comes the sweat, the child, how do I put this, that gets nervous and has to dance, that kind of thing. Yeah. I'm looking for all those signs. I didn't have any of them at all. Never a flinch, never a worry. Just, I'm not going to get into things, any kind of funny, but not that just sense of peace fell over me thing, but there really was no worry, no apprehension. Mm-hmm. We break through the operating room doors. I've never seen a room as large, with as many bright lights, with as many tables covered in the blue cloths because they're sterile. I've never seen so many doctors and nurses and staff. I mean, it's mind-boggling what they have to go through to get this thing to pull off. But I go in there without 1 ounce of anxiety. I remember moving from the gurney to the operating table on my own. And they took care of me pretty quick after that, though. And so I was out. And that's kind of the process leading up to it.
I didn't get the text because I was teaching Bible class. And Cliff came up to me and says, "What does NPO mean?" And I said, that means he's up for another heart. And so we're, after Wednesday night Bible class, everybody's trying to come in the auditorium. And I'm like trying to, call him and see what's going on. And he says, "I'm up for another heart." So I go back in. I think Cliff hadn't started making announcements. And I said, he's up for another heart. And, I can see a few people kind of jumping up and coming. And I know Sherry Harris and Anita Tucker and I think Carol Duncan and a couple other people were like trying to follow me and hug me and starting to cry. And do you even know? I was like, no, I'm good. And I think Sherry had Cameron. And me and Juliana drove over there because the next day Juliana was supposed to graduate from 5th grade. And we had already got her nails done. And, this was like a very positive, day for her coming up. And this was like the whole way over there we were just kind of just silent driving over there. And I don't know, it was kind of a funny feeling because I was like, everything's going to be okay, everything's going to be okay. And we got over there, and of course he's cutting up and doing his normal thing, and nurses are coming in, having a good time, and his parents got there shortly after, and me and his daddy, Pawpaw, we did nap occasionally because I'm one of those people that I have to sleep or I'm not going to be nice. Mm-hmm. And so every once in a while I would doze off, and I think him and his mom watched Andy Griffith and all kind of stuff throughout the night while the nurses were coming in. And then that morning when they said, it was time, they gave him his first dose of anti-rejection medicine. I was still fine, and we went down and we saw him in pre-op, and then Cliff and Beth had got there, and everything was fine until they said, it's coming from Oklahoma. And about that time, I almost passed out. The nurse had to get me something to drink and something to eat.
She was on the wall, and she just kind of slid down the wall like she melted.
I just, in my mind right then, I saw somebody losing a loved one, and coming all the way from Oklahoma, and somebody making that decision to say, we're going to try to help somebody else. It just hit me. And we kissed him, and he gave us a thumbs up and said everything was going to be fine. And we left and went into the waiting area, and his mom just cried and cried and cried. And I didn't cry. I just felt like everything was going to be fine. And I even took a nap out there in the waiting area because I was just so tired, and I just prayed. We were praying about it, and we had a good crowd show up. And then about the time that they called for the family, me and my sister and I think Bo Foster was there. He was a recent heart transplant recipient. Went to eat and they called and said, they want the family. And I was like, I just had walked to get something to eat, so we went right back up there. And they said he was done, and I was like, wow, that was quick. And so they said, give us a few minutes and we'll let you see him. So it was a few minutes, and then they said, well, you can come back. And me and his mom and dad went back, and you had to, wash your hands really good and put Germ-X on. And then we got to see him, and I cried. I cried and cried because for 6.5 years, he had been gray because his heart was so bad. And when I saw him laying there, he was, perfect color, rosy cheeks. He was so beautiful. He had tubes coming out everywhere. And, he was on a ventilator and all these machines were going, but he was so beautiful to me. And, I just cried and I said, God is so good, because I need a godly husband in my life, and I need my children to have a godly father. And I just was crying and thanking God so much. And I remember the doctors coming over there and them saying, what's wrong? What's wrong? And I was crying and I was saying, God is so good. God is so good. And, I said, he looks so pretty. I just kept saying, he looks so pretty. And they said how good he did. And they were in awe. They were just in shock. All of the doctors, especially the actual transplant surgeon. He was just, every time you turned around, you saw him just standing over him, because he was so amazed about how good the heart was, how good everything went. And you knew that it was just a blessing from God. No matter what happened, we knew that Jim was going to be fine. But just to have more time to hopefully get our children to know the Word of God, that together as a team, that was just a special gift that God gave me that day.
Wow. After transplant, Jim still had a lengthy road to recovery.
I came out of surgery pretty much the way I went in. As far as I was aware, anyway, I was alive. And I don't mean alive, I mean live. I came out and immediately my first recollection is tell them to take the ventilator off. I don't need it. And of course they hem-haw around and they say that they do. You got to have this and such as that. I'm saying, no, take it out. I wanted to talk. And basically what it was. And
he was signing.
Yeah, I was signing, telling them to take it out and all this. And so they're not wanting to do it. Well, finally, they basically said, okay, here's what we're going to tell you. Remember, we put this thing while you were out, unconscious, in surgery, and it was easy. If we take it out and you can't breathe on your own, we're putting it right back, and it's going to be bad. It's going to be rough. And I didn't care, take it out. And so, I was in recovery, obviously, for a certain time. And I'm talking about by the time I got to CCU, Critical Care Unit, it was about 45 minutes, and I had my ventilator off. And some people keep those for hours, some keep them for days even. That's average. And I'm 45 minutes, and I've got it out. Mm-hmm. And I immediately went to talking, entertaining, I guess, kind of sitting up, doing whatever I could. Now, that was the good old days right there, though. You don't realize how much the sedative's still there, the pain meds are still there. Mm. Day one was great. Got up, walked. They got marks on the floor. I just walked past everybody's mark. I walked out within the hall and came back. And but by day 2 and day 3, the pain had set in. I had some extra stuff I won't go into basically as far as pain, but it was really bad. The pain was awful then. I couldn't catch my breath. Just shaking. I hurt so bad. But it was just a tube that had gotten out of place in my lung. And so fast forward a little bit, about 48 hours out, I got that tube pulled. And all the doctors were still coming by regularly for no reason other than just to stare and to talk and such. And I got the tube out, and I was good to go then. They wanted me out of CCU then after about 48 hours, which again, you're supposed to be there about a week. 48 hours, I'm done. The only problem was there just wasn't a room for me on the floor I had to go to, which was HTIC, or Heart Transplant Intensive Care. So I had to wait on a room for 7 days, and that really held me back. I did a ton of walking on CCU. I would get out, and a lot of nights I would get out and just wander the unit, talk to everybody. I spent it several times, 15, 20, 30 minutes at a time. My transplant surgeon just kept coming back. Mm-hmm. I'd stand out in the hall and talk to him, which everybody else is bedridden. I'm in the hall talking. And it was really, really good just to get to see people. Everybody that knew of my case would end up not only coming back, but bringing somebody with them. Look at this man. Look at what he's done. And, I'm not putting this on myself. I'm repeating words. You wouldn't believe this man's faith, that kind of stuff. And so I tried to use that to my advantage. I put in my, took my punches and such and gave God the credit every time, obviously. And so that was a tremendous opportunity, really, for me. But the doctor said basically that the heart that I got, they said it's probably the best one they've seen in about 3 years. Mm. They said my recovery, and this comes from several different people who've been there a while, one of which is your father-in-law, said my recovery is probably one of the best they've seen in 25.
Wow.
And so they're just blown away. They still are. I go to clinic regularly, have different things done, heart caths done monthly, that type of stuff. And several times it's been brought up to me by all different people who are involved in the process, whether it be coordinators, doctors, nurses, whatever. There's been a lot of discussion over how good I've done. For example, they were discussing one day in a big meeting just about how some patients do really well and some not so well. And they said, when they said, well, think about somebody that did really well, my name came up, period. On first name basis with everybody, but it's got to be Jim. He's absolutely doing as good as anybody. And there's no doubt why that is. Mm-hmm. Especially when you get all the way down to the kind of the final thing that brings it to light. And there's so much that I could add to it. But they come back later and said, not only does your blood match, obviously, your tissues match, but the individual antibodies, which is a really, really narrow spectrum, they match perfectly too.
Wow.
And so this is, again, one of the best matches they've ever seen. And they don't have an explanation as far as medically, but I haven't encountered too many that won't tell you they pretty much figured that one out. Mm-hmm. They know God's got something to do with that. So I don't mind being, and I've kind of become their poster child, their example for everybody. I've got to counsel several other people, pre and post transplant, that type of thing, and advise people on what to do and not to do. And that's been a blessing. I get emails, phone call, you name it. I've talked to people all over about this process and tried to encourage them that things can be good. You just have to do what they ask and keep God first, and you can make it.
When I sat down with Jim and Jennifer, it had been about 9 months since Jim received his new heart. I asked them what they had learned and what they'd like to share with others. Here's what they said.
I think I've learned, because it was extremely hard on me, but I think going through all this, I built a stronger faith, just because you don't know what to pray for. I mean, you literally don't, because if you pray for your husband to get a heart, then you're almost saying you're praying for somebody to lose their loved one. And then it's a confusing time. But we got in the Word, in God's Word, as much as possible. And just really just left it up to Him, no matter what. Because we knew that He was trying to live His life right. And it just, if you're trying to do what you're supposed to do, then we knew everything was going to be fine, no matter what. As far as somebody going through that, just prayer for me. I think prayer is underrated because we assume that God knows what we want, what we need. But when you make those requests known and lay them at His feet, then that's when He can say, they're leaving it with me. And you don't go out, because we've done that. We could talk about that too, where we say, God, we want you to handle this. And then we go around and try to do God's job for Him. When we just wait on it, and in His time, because we thought We prayed for him to get a heart transplant at Christmas. I mean, any special occasion you could think of. But when it came, because the heart was so good, and I mean, we could tell you numerous things. I mean, we had an apartment that we were allowed to stay in free of charge, only because of the certain time period we were there.
Mm-hmm.
And all of that is just the providence of God saying, this is my time to bless y'all. And in all that time waiting, it's built faith in me, because I was like, in the book of James, I was double-minded, saying, I know what God says, but this is what I want, and it just built a lot of character and faith in me, which I'm always a work in process, or work in progress.
One of the phrases I've always used that I never comprehended was that a faith that cannot be tested cannot be trusted. And the reason I say that is because you see a lot of people that around you, and you say, well, boy, if I only had the faith of brother so-and-so or sister so-and-so, they sure are this and they sure are that. It's shocking sometimes how far those people fall when they finally have a problem in their own life. And I don't downgrade or discredit or make fun of anybody that does fall. I want to help lift them up. But at the same time, you don't know how strong you can be until your faith is tested. And so once your faith is tested in one area, if you'll use that to your advantage to build your character for the next one, something else is coming. And I've said this 100 times to anybody that'll ask. They say, well, I hate that you had to go through this. I don't. Not at all. It made me better, stronger, and it made me able to help people.
Jim Murrell represents a very rare case, even among the churches of Christ. Jim is the man with two new hearts. The new heart he received via transplant that now pumps blood through his veins, and the new heart he received as a new creature in Christ. My name's Chris Clevenger. Thank you once again for listening to This Christian Life.